What happens when a pretentious gallery owner publicly humiliates a talented young black artist without realizing that Morgan Freeman is among the evening's guests? What began as a devastating rejection transforms into a night that would change the art world forever. By the time the gallery lights dimmed, no one would forget the words Morgan spoke, or the life-changing opportunity that left everyone in tears. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. The Prescott Gallery gleamed like a jewel in Manhattan's Chelsea district, its stark white walls and polished concrete floors a temple to what its owner, Victoria Prescott, called art that matters. Tonight marked the gallery's prestigious annual Emerging Voices exhibition, where 8 carefully selected new artists would have their work displayed for New York's elite art collectors and critics. The gallery's minimalist interior had been transformed for the evening. Champagne flowed freely, servers in black circulated with delicate hors d'oeuvres, and the city's wealthiest art patrons drifted between exhibits, their murmured conversations creating a gentle hum beneath the carefully curated ambient music. In the corner near the smallest display space stood 26-year-old Marcus Washington, trying to calm his racing heart. After years of rejection, countless hours working double shifts to afford paint supplies, and creating art in his tiny Bronx apartment, he had finally been included in a major gallery exhibition. His collection, Inherited Memory, explored the echoes of historical trauma and resilience through striking portraits that blended traditional techniques with raw contemporary energy. Marcus tugged at the collar of his only suit, a slightly too small ensemble purchased from a thrift store for this very occasion. He had practiced what he would say when approached by potential buyers, how he would explain his artistic philosophy, the significance behind each brushstroke. But so far, most attendees had merely glanced at his work before moving on to the more prominently displayed collections. Victoria Prescott moved through her gallery like a queen surveying her kingdom. At 58, she had built her reputation on having an unerring eye for the next big thing in art. Her silver bob was cut with geometric precision. Her black designer dress cost more than Marcus's rent for 6 months, and her critical pronouncements could make or break an artist's career with devastating efficiency. What only her closest associates knew was that Victoria had not actually selected Marcus's work for inclusion. Her new assistant curator, Zoe Chen, had championed his portfolio, and Victoria had reluctantly agreed, partly to appear progressive and partly because a last-minute cancellation had left them with an open slot. She had relegated his paintings to the least visible corner of the gallery. "Darling, how are we doing over here?" Victoria's voice carried the practiced warmth she reserved for public occasions as she finally made her way to Marcus's display. "Any interest in your—" She paused, glancing at his work with barely disguised distaste. "Interesting pieces?" "A few people have stopped to look," Marcus replied, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice. "I was just having a good conversation with a collector about the historical references in the background elements." Victoria's smile tightened. "Yes, well, this crowd tends to favor more sophisticated conceptual work. Your pieces are very—" She searched for a word that could sound like a compliment while conveying criticism. "Direct." A small group of gallery patrons had drifted within earshot, among them several influential critics and collectors. Victoria, ever aware of her audience, saw an opportunity to demonstrate her curatorial expertise. "Tell me, Mr. Washington," she said, raising her voice slightly to ensure she could be heard, "what exactly were you attempting to convey with this rather heavy-handed symbolism?" She gestured toward his centerpiece, a powerful portrait of a young man whose face was partially obscured by ghostly images from historical civil rights protests. Marcus began to explain the layered meanings in his work, how the translucent historical imagery represented the way past struggles inform present identity, how the technical contrasts between the realistic portrait and the impressionistic historical elements created a visual dialogue about memory and inheritance. Victoria cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. Yes, very literal, very political. She pronounced the word as if it were synonymous with unsophisticated. The small audience chuckled, sensing blood in the water. You see, Victoria continued, warming to her role as the arbiter of taste. True artistic innovation isn't about making obvious statements about identity politics. That's been done to death, hasn't it? The market is absolutely saturated with this sort of, she gestured vaguely at Marcus's paintings, narrative work. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Years of practice maintaining dignity in the face of rejection couldn't prepare him for this public humiliation. What the serious collector looks for, Victoria continued, now fully performing for her audience, is work that transcends these tired political statements. Work that speaks to universal aesthetic principles rather than specific cultural grievances. A few patrons nodded in agreement, while others looked uncomfortably at their shoes. Marcus stood frozen, watching his opportunity crumble before his eyes. Perhaps, Victoria said, her voice dripping with false kindness, you might consider a more commercial approach. Your technical skills are adequate. Portraiture for private clients can be quite lucrative, I understand. The suggestion was clear. Your work doesn't belong in the real art world. Find something more suited to your level. Marcus struggled to find words that would defend his artistic vision without sounding defensive or confrontational. A tightrope walk familiar to any artist from a marginalized background. Before he could respond, a deep, distinctive voice spoke from just outside the circle of onlookers. I find it interesting that you consider engagement with history and identity to be unsophisticated, Ms. Prescott. The crowd parted as Morgan Freeman stepped forward, his imposing presence commanding immediate attention. At 87, he carried himself with the quiet dignity and gravitas that had made him an icon both on screen and off. He wore a simple but impeccably tailored navy suit, a light blue shirt open at the collar, and a thoughtful expression as he studied Marcus's paintings. The gallery fell silent. Victoria Prescott's face cycled through shock, recognition, and barely concealed panic. Mr. Freeman, she stammered, instantly shifting into her most ingratiating tone. What an unexpected honor. Had I known you were attending this evening? Morgan smiled politely but didn't take his eyes off Marcus's work. I prefer to experience art without announcement sometimes. Allows me to form my own impressions without... He paused meaningfully. Curatorial influence. A nervous titter ran through the crowd, which had grown considerably as word spread that Morgan Freeman was in the gallery. Phones appeared discreetly as patrons attempted to capture the moment. These paintings, Morgan continued, addressing Marcus directly now, remind me of Jacob Lawrence's Migration series, but with a contemporary technical approach that feels entirely original. He pointed to a specific detail in one of the portraits. This brushwork here, the way you've created tension between the precise realism of the face and the more expressionistic historical elements, that's masterful. Marcus stood speechless, hardly believing that Morgan Freeman, a legendary actor known for his own art collection and philanthropy in the arts, was not only viewing his work, but understanding it on a profound level. Morgan turned to Victoria, whose smile had frozen in place. Ms. Prescott, you suggested that this work relies on heavy-handed symbolism, but I see the opposite. I see nuance and subtlety in how these historical references are incorporated. The viewer is invited to make connections rather than being told what to think. Victoria attempted to recover. Of course, different perspectives are what make art so fascinating. I merely... Different perspectives indeed, Morgan interrupted smoothly. Though I wonder if dismissing work that engages with cultural heritage as obvious or tired might reveal more about the limitations of the critic than the artist. The gallery had gone completely silent. Victoria's face flushed deep red. Morgan returned his attention to Marcus. Young man, what's your name? Marcus Washington, sir. Marcus Washington, Morgan repeated as if committing it to memory. Tell me about this piece. He gestured to a smaller painting that depicted an elderly man whose weathered face emerged from a background of fragmented historical documents. Slave ship manifests, freedom papers, voting rights legislation. Given the opportunity to discuss his work without condescension, Marcus found his voice. He explained how the painting explored the way historical documents that catalogued, controlled, or eventually liberated black bodies continued to shape lived experience across generations. How the technical contrast between the hyper-realistic portrait and the abstracted historical elements created a visual metaphor for the way past and present coexist in black consciousness. As Marcus spoke, his initial nervousness gave way to passionate articulation of his artistic vision. The gathered crowd, which now included most of the exhibition's attendees, listened with growing interest. Some moved closer to examine details he mentioned. Others nodded thoughtfully at his explanations. Morgan listened intently, occasionally asking insightful questions that allowed Marcus to elaborate on his technical choices and conceptual framework. It became clear to everyone present that Morgan wasn't simply being kind to a young artist. He was genuinely engaged with the work and impressed by its execution. "You know," Morgan said when Marcus had finished explaining his collection, "I've been collecting art for nearly 50 years. I've watched movements come and go, seen artists rise to prominence and fade from memory. What endures isn't what follows trends or avoids difficult subjects. What endures is authenticity and technical excellence in service of genuine vision." He turned to address the crowd directly. "And that's precisely what I see in Marcus Washington's work." Victoria Prescott, recognizing the shifting dynamics in her gallery, attempted to align herself with Morgan's assessment. "As I was saying earlier, Mr. Washington's technical execution is quite promising. That's precisely why we included his work in tonight's exhibition." Morgan's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes carried a knowing look. "Is that so? Then I'm surprised his work was placed in the least visible corner of your gallery, Ms. Prescott." Several patrons exchanged glances. Victoria's assistant, Zoe, failed to suppress a smile. "Real recognition of artistic merit," Morgan continued, "isn't just about inclusion. It's about presentation, promotion, and respect." He turned back to Marcus's display. "These paintings deserve to be seen, properly seen. What happened next would be recounted in art world circles for years to come." Morgan Freeman, with the deliberate pace and authoritative presence that had made him an iconic screen presence, began to examine each of Marcus's paintings in detail. As he did, he asked questions about price, about Marcus's other work, about his artistic journey. The crowd, following Morgan's lead, began to really see Marcus's work for the first time, and as they looked, truly looked, the quality became undeniable. A well-known collector approached hesitantly. "Is this piece available?" he asked, pointing to the painting Morgan had first discussed. Before Marcus could answer, another voice spoke up. "I'm interested in that one." A prominent museum curator pointed to a different canvas. Within 20 minutes, small red, sold dots began appearing beside Marcus's paintings. Victoria Prescott watched in astonishment as work she had dismissed as unmarketable was quickly becoming the most sought-after collection of the evening. When 6 of Marcus's 8 paintings had sold, Morgan turned to him with a warm smile. "I'd like to purchase the remaining 2 if that's acceptable to you, but I have a larger proposition as well, if you'd be willing to discuss it." As the gallery event continued around them, Morgan led Marcus to a quiet corner. Their conversation, while private, would change the trajectory of Marcus's life forever. "I have a foundation that supports artists whose work engages meaningfully with cultural heritage and social history," Morgan explained. "We provide funding, but more importantly, we provide opportunities, studio space, mentorship, connections to museums and major galleries." Marcus listened in disbelief as Morgan outlined what he was offering: a 2-year fellowship that would provide studio space in a converted warehouse building Morgan owned in Brooklyn, a stipend generous enough that Marcus could quit his side jobs and focus entirely on his art, and introductions to serious curators and critics who valued the kind of work Marcus was creating. "Why?" Marcus finally asked. "Why would you do this for me? You just met me tonight." Morgan's expression grew reflective. "When I was starting out as an actor, roles for black men were limited to stereotypes and servants. It took people willing to see beyond convention to create opportunities for authentic representation. Art, like film, needs champions willing to recognize talent that challenges the established order." He paused, his gaze drifting to the gallery where Victoria Prescott was now animatedly describing Marcus's work to potential buyers, as if she had discovered him personally. "Besides," Morgan added with a slight smile, "your work speaks to me. That portrait with the historical documents in the background? My grandfather was born to parents who remembered slavery. The documents you incorporated, freedom papers, voting rights legislation, those shaped his life. My father's life, my life. You've captured something profound about how history lives in us." By the end of the evening, all of Marcus's paintings had sold for prices far exceeding what he had ever imagined possible. Victoria Prescott, masterfully pivoting to align herself with the evening's success story, was telling anyone who would listen that she had recognized Marcus's raw talent from the beginning. As the event wound down, Morgan and Marcus exchanged contact information to arrange details of the fellowship. Before they parted, Morgan placed a hand on the young artist's shoulder. "What happened tonight isn't just about sales or recognition," he said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "It's about claiming your rightful place in a conversation that's been going on for centuries. Your voice matters in that conversation, Marcus. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." 3 months later, Marcus Washington's first solo exhibition opened at a respected gallery in Chelsea, not the Prescott Gallery, but one known for its commitment to diverse artistic voices. The show, titled Witnesses, expanded on the themes in his Emerging Voices collection, exploring intergenerational memory and historical consciousness through an even more ambitious series of portraits. The opening night drew an impressive crowd, including several artists and curators who had been introduced to Marcus through Morgan Freeman's foundation. Reviews in major art publications praised the work's technical virtuosity and conceptual depth. Multiple museums expressed interest in acquiring pieces for their permanent collections. Morgan attended the opening without fanfare, quietly observing as Marcus confidently discussed his work with critics, collectors, and fellow artists. The young man had grown not just in artistic skill, but in the certainty of his vision and his right to express it. Late in the evening, a reporter approached Marcus for an interview. "Your rise has been meteoric," she observed. "Just a few months ago you were unknown, and now you're being hailed as an important new voice in contemporary art. What changed?" Marcus considered the question carefully. He could have mentioned Morgan Freeman's intervention, the sales at the Prescott Gallery, the fellowship that had transformed his material circumstances. Instead, he said, "Nothing about my work changed. What changed was who was willing to see it." From his position across the gallery, Morgan smiled. The true power of that night at the Prescott Gallery wasn't in the sales or even in the fellowship opportunity. It was in the public affirmation of a simple truth that the art world too often forgot. That authentic vision deserves recognition regardless of its source, that the perspectives of those traditionally excluded from cultural institutions bring vital energy and insight to the conversation, and that sometimes it takes someone with the courage to challenge conventional wisdom to reveal what was valuable all along. As Morgan had put it in a recent interview about his foundation's support of artists like Marcus, art isn't just about aesthetics, it's about whose stories get told, whose experiences are deemed worthy of expression. Supporting diverse artistic voices isn't charity or political correctness. It's an investment in a more complete and truthful cultural legacy. A year after that fateful night at the Prescott Gallery, Victoria Prescott approached Marcus about hosting a solo exhibition of his new work. With the quiet confidence of an artist who now had options, Marcus declined. Instead, he collaborated with Zoe Chen, the assistant curator who had originally championed his work, who had since opened her own gallery dedicated to underrepresented artists. As for Morgan Freeman, he continued his quiet philanthropy in the arts, rarely seeking publicity for his efforts. When asked about his intervention on Marcus Washington's behalf, he typically deflected, saying only that he recognized genuine talent when he saw it. But those who were present at the Prescott Gallery that night never forgot the moment when one of America's most respected actors used his influence not for personal gain, but to ensure that an authentic artistic voice could be heard. And in art world circles, the story became a powerful reminder that true cultural gatekeeping isn't about maintaining exclusive standards or following market trends. It's about recognizing authentic vision wherever it appears, and ensuring it has the opportunity to flourish. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more inspiring stories about celebrities who use their fame for good. Share in the comments if you've ever had someone believe in your talents when others didn't. We'd love to hear your stories.